On my hand here is actually the XF50 F1.0. This is the fastest in production autofocus lens today. And today we're having a short look at what this lens does and actually how does it perform in the field and who is it for. I'm Richard and welcome to ZP Productions. And on my hand here is the fastest 50mm in production lens that is autofocus today. This is the 50mm f1.0 by Fujifilm, the XF lens, in a very professional one at it. So the thing is that 51.0 is not, this is not the first, because there was a Canon 51.0 autofocus lens, and before that, there are the various Leica Noct, which are like 0.95, f1, f1.1, and also recently Nikon just released the 58 f0.95 lens. So definitely f1 is not the fastest you can get in the market, and this is definitely also not the first autofocus f1 lens you can get your hands on, the first being the Canon itself. The thing is, what makes this interesting is because most of these lenses are either very boutique, very exclusive, or if not, they are no longer in production, such as the Canon lens. This is the fastest in production lens, and for its 1.0 aperture, it is a really large, big and heavy lens, especially that it is built for APS-C. Now, before I start, I'd like to thank Fujifilm Singapore for loaning me this lens and the X-T4. And together, I can actually bring you guys a very short review on this lens and actually who is this lens built for itself. Now, this lens, if you ask me after I tried it, it is a little bit of a mixed bag. I would say as if you are a portrait photographer and you want something unique with a different look, this is the lens for you. And especially if you use the X-T4 or the X-T3 or any of the X mount and you really want the fastest lens you can get your hands on and you are doing portrait, this is the lens for you. However, if you are looking for a lens to really use for night photography, use for landscape at night, because this is a 51.0, and if you equate it to some full frame, this is like a 75 1.4. It is a very fast lens, but after testing it, I really can't recommend this lens for the purpose of landscape or any form of night photography with a lot of lights, and I can explain to you, especially in my image section. That being said, this lens actually reminds me of a lens I owned before, and that is the Leica Summilux 75mm f1.4. In fact, if you ask me, the rendering of this lens is so close to that lens, it really brings memories back. And if you go online and search, or if you were a Leica fan in some sort of way, you will know what I'm talking about. The 75 1.4 is a perfect portrait lens with very interesting characteristics, and I think this lens holds it. However, that being said, you should know by now what do I mean by it. And I can straight away tell you that this lens is definitely not the sharpest lens wide open. It is also not the most corrected lens wide open. But if you are looking to have one of the nicer portrait lens on a XF mount on the Fujifilm X system, this may be the lens for you. So without further ado, let's go down to the full review of this lens here. Now, this is of course a very short initial review because I only had this lens for a week and I only had 2 shoots with it. There are certain reasons why I can't use this lens for bulk of my other shoots, and I'll explain to you in the review, especially when the image quality section comes in. However, that being said, for the 2 shoots I've used it, I come to a certain conclusion on what this lens is actually ready for, and whatever I said earlier was really based on the experience of those 2 shoots. So now, with that in mind, let's move on to the review of this lens, from build quality to on-field handling, and ultimately image quality of this lens itself. And once this lens is out, who is this lens actually for itself? Now, the thing is that in terms of build quality, this lens is a really solid build lens. It is 800 plus grams. You can go online and search for the exact weight. Or in fact, I can put you a picture here. It's 800 plus grams. It is quite a stouty wide lens, and it's fully made of metal. So one thing I like about Fuji lens is that no matter how, their lens actually feel very premium. Of course, this lens is weather sealed according to Fuji, and I trust it because I own their GFX lenses and they work pretty much well in rain. Of course, I didn't put them in pouring rain, but in light rain, mid rain, I can actually use it quite well. And Fujifilm has been making all these weather sealed lens for some time. I hope that they really did a good job of sealing this lens itself. However, we ignoring the sealing which we can't see and can't test, The build quality of this lens is fantastic. It is a full metal build. You can actually feel everything on this lens is so solid, just like a Leica lens if you ask me. And the metal, everything, the rings are also metal ripped. And then of course everything is well tensioned, and even the aperture ring is well tensioned. Right, you can see here, I'm turning the ring now, it's well tension ringed. No, the thing is that, of course, this is a mirrorless lens, and the autofocus ring has no end stops in it, and there is no notable way of telling where are you focusing on the lens other than to look at the camera. And being a pure mirrorless, this is also decoupled from the focusing mechanism, and you will need to put it with a body to actually utilize it. So that being said, this lens in terms of build quality is totally fantastic. Very well built lens, very solid, and not too heavy, 800 plus gram. Now you may think that for 800 plus gram this may be actually a heavy lens on its own, but actually if you compare to something like this here, this is the 50 1.2 RF lens, and this is a 50 1.0 XF lens. Yes, this fulfills a crop size body, while this is a full frame, but this is like a 75 1.4 and this is a 50 1.2. So in terms of sizing, they shouldn't differ too much, but I can tell you that this is smaller and still slightly lighter than the Canon 50 1.2. And you really can put them side by side and see the difference is slight, but it is noticeable when you hold them in your hand. So I wouldn't say that this is a massive lens, but for the purpose of the system, for the XF system, this is truly one big lens itself. So build quality wise, I think it's a fantastic built lens. So let's move on to the next section, which is the handling in the field itself, the autofocus, and of course IBIS. Before I start, let's mount this lens on the X-T4. Okay, so mounted on X-T4, I feel that this lens is a little bit front heavy when it comes to handling. It's a little bit front heavy itself, and that's something really notable because this lens is quite a big lens. In fact, one of the biggest lens in the XF mount. I think the only other lens that are huge is all the big telezooms, and of course the 200mm, which is a big teleprime. Other than that, for a lens, especially for a 50mm range lens, this is quite a big lens on the XT system, and you can really feel the weight pulling forward. The grip I feel on the X-T4 is not substantial enough for such a heavy lens, so you should use two hands to handle it properly. If not, use a strap for additional safety itself. And that, in terms of handling, is quite simple. Being a XF lens, there is of course the aperture ring, and you can actually set your aperture ring easily in the field, and handling is quite easy. The only thing is missing on this ring is I don't understand why the Fuji XF system do not use the same thing as what you see in the GFX, where there is a locking for the A and the C, and that allows you to actually lock the aperture ring in a digital way so that you don't accidentally hit it and knock it around. Well, I guess that is a personal decision by Fuji, or maybe aesthetic decision, I'm not too sure. Just to know that this ring, I always say that it tends to get knocked over a little bit, and check your aperture before you take a shot. That's about it, because the GFX system has been always like this since the first day, so I'm getting used to it. That being said, handling in the field, as I say, a little bit front heavy, and because the XT series don't have such a deep grip, just be safe, have additional strap, or if not, buy one of those grip mechanism that allows you to have a deeper grip on your XT body when handling this lens, because this lens is by no means light, especially on the XT body itself. When it comes to autofocus, I find that the autofocus is pretty okay, not the fastest in the world, not the slowest either, and I have used XT series bodies before. I would say, as compared to, at least in my memory, it is faster than the XF56. Compared to the 50mm f2, it feels about the same. And when I was using iDetect to do my photo shoots, it seems to be okay. I mean, the hit rate is like 80-90%. And I don't think it's anything to do with this lens, and more to do with the body itself. Because Fujifilm bodies are still not as good as the Canons and the Sony AF system, but when it came out, it was pretty much second place. It's just superseded by Canon and their latest R5. If not, I find that the IAF and the general AF system, especially this lens, is pretty much okay. That being said, I tried doing action shots with it. I think the either the body is not catching up or the lens is not catching up. But definitely, moving shots, especially for people moving forward and backward or spinning, is a little bit hard on the XT system still. So that's something to note on when it comes to autofocus. Not the fastest in the world, but definitely acceptable. At least in my memories, the XT system and the GFX system seems to be about the same when it comes to such qualities in terms of autofocus itself. Okay, then when it comes to IBIS, it's a little bit different. Okay, so IBIS with a f1.0 lens, so this is actually equivalent to a 75mm f1.4, and I have tried this lens with this XT body to shoot static subject. As you can see here, I'm shooting push-in and it's one of the serial numbers. At 115 itself, you get a very good hit rate of 80%. 115 is quite a lot of shutter. It's 70, 35, 25. Then after that, you got about 15. It's about 3 stops over. And normally when you shoot a lens like this, you need double stop. Actually, you should use about 100 plus to actually get a sharp shot. But at least in my own testing with IBIS itself, I get about 4 stop advantage with the inbuilt IBIS of the XT4 and the 50mm f1.0. Now, if you try to shoot it at 1.8, you get a very low hit count of about 20 to 30%. And if you go to 1.4, if you're lucky, maybe you get 1 hit in like 10 hits. So I won't push my luck too far. And I think that 115 with this lens and the XT4 seems to be just about nice to get a very good hit rate of, 80% if you ask me. So now, with 80% hit rate at 115 and an f1.0 aperture, this lens looks like a dream for night photography, night shoots and stuff. However, when we enter the image section, I will talk about a little bit more on this lens. And as I said earlier, this is a portrait lens. It reminds me of the Lumilux 1.4, which is a very, very old lens. It is not a lens, I feel personally, for the purpose of landscape. At least if you don't stop down, it is not very useful. And we'll talk about it now in the next section, the image quality section. Now, the image quality section is a little bit baffling to me at times. When I first tested this lens, I'm a little bit confused to a certain extent. Because when I was trying it out, I was wondering, why this lens just feels so different? It feels so different yet so familiar to me. I shot, when I got this lens, it was already evening. So when I went back, I just shot some night scene. And the first thing I noticed is that firstly, there is some slight haze. And secondly, there is a lot of blooming, which means lights tend to look bigger than normal. And they have a halo around it. And what's more is that this halo actually had chromatic aberration. Significant amount of chromatic aberrations. These chromatic aberrations are removable. In fact, you can see one of these shots here. I removed the chromatic aberrations with some sort of the profile or the manual dropper in Lightroom, and you can pretty much remove quite a bit of these chromatic aberrations to get relatively clean photo. But the haze is still there, and the amount of blooming, especially you have in the lights, are still there. This is optical aberration that I don't expect to have on a modern XF lens, because I'm using a GFX system, and a lot of the GFX lens cost slightly cheaper than this, especially even entry range lenses. But all of them do not suffer from such problem. In fact, even my memory of the 200 f2 was so perfect, I was thinking that maybe this lens will be a very modern rendition of a f1.0. But it really caught me off guard. It doesn't look like any of this modern 50mm lens there is. And if you were to compare with a modern lens, let's look at this photo here. This is a modern 85 1.2 RF, and you can see it is insanely tech sharp, no blooming, no hazing, and no chromatic aberration. So with this in mind, it really got me thinking, why would Fujifilm make a f1.0 lens with so much blooming, so much aberration, so much optical flaws at wide open? There must be some purpose, right? I mean, Fujifilm is not a newbie in lens making. It's not a budget company, and this lens is launching at $1,500 USD. So as such, what I did next was what I always use my lens for: portraiture. And really, when I use it for portraiture, it really reminds me of this Lumilux f1.4. So how do I put it in very simple terms? This lens was designed for portrait. I'm pretty sure whoever who made this optical formula wanted a very, I would say, as a lens with character. That's what I would put it, a lens with character. And now, a lens with character normally means a lens with aberrations and a lot of optical flaws. But to me, a lens with character also means that for portraiture, especially for female portraiture, it is a very, very pleasing lens. It is not the sharpest lens in the world, but it renders the skin very nicely. It gives a very nice glow due to the slight hazing in the shot itself and the slight blooming, especially in the highlights. In fact, as I said, this lens is totally like a Summilux f1.4. By the way, if you go online and search for Summilux f1.4, that lens, even secondhand, costs twice the price of this lens, and it is still a sought after lens for the purpose of its optical characteristics. Wide open, it is exactly the same. It blooms, there is hazing, there is some aberrations that you can correct like this lens itself. The thing is that the Summilux 1.4 don't even have autofocus, and yet it is a very sought after lens that's produced almost 30 years ago. Wow, this lens is so modern, autofocuses, does everything the Summilux 1.4 does, the Summilux 75 1.4. This is exactly like a continuator of the Summilux 75 1.4, because 50 1.0 is 75 1.4. So I do not know whether the inspiration of creating this lens in Fuji was some guy who actually owns the Summilux 75 1.4, or really loved the 75 1.4, or just so happened wanted to create a highly characteristic a lens with a lot of character, I do not know really, because when I use it, that is the feeling I get, a Summilux 75 1.4 lens. Same field of view, same type of aberration characters, a little bit not so sharp, however, have this very nice natural glow, nice smooth portraiture all around. And the fact is that if you actually look closely, the bokeh itself, this lens is also smoother than most modern lenses when it comes to bokeh. In fact, if you compare to the 85 1.2, which is a 1.2 85mm, much longer and much shallower in its depth of field, and much larger in terms of its optics, the lens itself has more distinct bokeh, lined bokeh, while this guy is a bit softer, a bit smoother, something like a DS lens equivalent. But, it's accomplished by having not so perfect optics, just like the Summilux 75 1.4 Leica lens. So overall, I didn't want to go too deep into the image quality, because this lens doesn't seem to be the type that produce superlative image quality. In fact, when I stop down to 1.4, I still get some of these aberrations. I guess you have to stop down to maybe 5.6, but I usually don't shoot at 5.6, so I don't have images to show you on that. It really, when it comes to my final thoughts, I think this lens is literally in production autofocus Summilux 75 1.4 for the XF system. A nice lens for the purpose of portraiture, a very fast lens for the purpose of portraiture. Nice bokeh, smooth bokeh, nice skin, smooth skin, glowing and radiant skin for the females. If you are shooting female portraiture, this is definitely the lens you will want to get. You make them look very nice, healthy, glowing, smooth. Now, if you are shooting or hoping to get this lens for night landscape to really utilize its f1.0 or do some sort of astro with it, I have no idea why you would do astro with a 75mm lens, this is not the lens for you. With the blooming, the chromatic aberrations, the hazing, f1.0 is literally, if you ask me, on my personal opinion, it is a no-go for night landscape. But for portraiture, perfectly fine. You don't need the absolute sharpness. What you need is nice rendition of the human skin, nice rendition of the human portrait, and I think this lens will get you there. In fact, if you use this lens to shoot, you probably need to edit lesser to get nice portrait for ladies. So I do not know whether, as I say once again, this may actually be a sole continuator or should I say a reproduction of a Summilux 75 1.4 Leica lens at half the price with autofocus. So what's not to like, right? So it goes to my very final conclusion. This is a 1.5K lens. It is no means cheap, but it's also no means overly expensive, especially for f1.0. However, its characteristic is not what you should expect from a modern XF lens. It is not an ultra sharp, ultra defined, corner to corner sharpness lens. What it does is it produces you a nice rendition of a human skin, very nice for female portraiture. It is sharp throughout the entire lens. Let me correct it. It is sharp throughout the entire lens. Corner to corner, it looks the same. And when I mean the same, it literally means the amount of hazing and softness is the same throughout the entire lens. So if you like the kind of character, looking to shoot female portraits, and want a lens that really renders skin and give a very nice, natural glow to the skin, this is the lens for you. It is a portrait lens for the XF system that literally looks like the Summilux 75 1.4. And that's about it for today's review of the XF50mm f1.0. It's really a mixed bag to me, and I just want to share with you how I feel about this mixed bag, because I think that because I used the 75 Summilux before, I really like that lens. I sold it away because I moved on to the GFX system, and that lens totally cannot perform on a medium format sensor, obviously. But this lens seems to be the continuation of it, and if you are looking for a Summilux 75 1.4, this may be that lens for you. I hope you enjoyed this review, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.